with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, mahaba, muni muli wanji, namaste, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are so delighted and so very, very honored that you would join us in our mission to help all families grow closer through reading. Please be sure to tell all of your family and friends about the show, and please be sure to subscribe to the show on the iHeartRadio app, on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher Radio, wherever you find your podcasts. Today, Jordan Sahley sits down and speaks to Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiro about their brand new middle grade novel, The Sun and the Star. Before we invite Jordan, Mark, and Rick into the studio, we want to let you know that we have a brand new Reading with Your Kids certified great read. The Antidotes, Pollution Solution, an exciting and educational book written by public health expert and scientist Dr. Patty Michelle. This book follows a group of fifth graders as they navigate the challenges of a post-pandemic world. Just as they are settling back into school and normal life, they discover that the Chesapeake Bay has been contaminated by a failed plastic-eating bacteria experiment. Both the fish and the children in the area are falling ill due to the pollution. The young protagonists, Izzy, Gear, and their friends, belong to a science club where they uncover a cover-up related to the contamination. As a result, the school is forced to close again. Determined to find solutions, the friends join forces with public health activists and become the Antidotes, a group of climate warriors committed to tackling environmental issues. We love this book. We think it is an excellent resource for middle schoolers as it combines storytelling with a compelling social message, fostering a generation of environmentally conscious and socially engaged young individuals. We believe it's a must-have for your school or your classroom or your family library. Get it today. The Antidotes, Pollution Solution, written by Dr. Patty Michelle.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Today we are joined by Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiro, who are here to talk about their new book, The Sun and the Star. How are you guys doing?
Doing great. Thanks for having us.
We're doing wonderful. Thank you.
First, do you guys want to tell us a little bit about your book?
Yeah, we can do that. The Sun and the Star. It's basically set in Percy Jackson's universe, but it revolves around the main character, Nico di Angelo, the son of Hades, who is one of the fan favorites in Percy's world. And this is the first time that he and his boyfriend, Will Solace, are getting a book all of their own.
Wow. And how did you end up collaborating on this?
Magic. It was magic. I mean, it was. It really was. I had been reached out to by Steph Lurie, our editor on this project. I had worked with her before. And when Rick realized that he wanted to write with someone else and have some other voice contributing to the story of Nico di Angelo, Stephanie reached out to me. We had a wonderful, very shocking Zoom meeting where I was like, oh my God, this is really happening. And so from there was an initial sort of audition where I wrote sample pages for the first few chapters of the book. And once everything got approved, it has been back and forth. We did everything over Zoom or email or in the notes of Microsoft Word. Like, we'd have many ways where we sort of talked back and forth with each other. But it really was, back and forth is a great way to describe it. From the outline to the drafts through the editing, it has just been one person back to the other and back and forth like this. And it helped make the final version that, everyone will get to read on May 2nd.
Yeah.
How did you go about, combining your writing and stuff?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question, and one that I was nervous about. I didn't know the answer to that. I had never collaborated on a book with anyone before. Basically, I think it was a matter of me recognizing what my strengths were and what my weaknesses were as a writer, and allowing myself to learn from what Mark brought to the manuscript and sort of let our styles inform one another. So I think readers will notice when they read The Sun and the Star that it is richer than your regular Percy Jackson novel. It is more emotionally fulfilling. It has more character depth. And I think it's just a better read. And I think that's credit to Mark.
I do remember we had that very early conversation of, wait, how do we do this? And it was like a logistical question because neither of us had collaborated before. And so we had to, how does this work? Do you start? Do I start? How do we? And so I think we developed this like beautiful sense of communication and partnership so early on that it helped guide us as we then started writing the book. And I hope that it, shows in the final version too.
What made you decide that Nico's story was the next one you wanted to tell?
Well, the fans have been asking for this book for years, years and years, and they really wanted to read this adventure. What made me decide that it was time? I think it was a number of things. I set up this story in the last series I wrote, The Trials of Apollo. So I had laid the groundwork. I knew what would happen plot-wise. Also, this was when I became familiar with Mark's work, and we identified them as really a great potential partner. So it was just kind of a happy bit of synchronicity that everything came together the way it did.
Yeah, that's awesome. Mark, how involved were you with the Percy Jackson series before this book came about?
Very involved. I started reading this series in 2018. I had just released my first book, Anger is a Gift, and I had asked a friend, hey, I need something that maybe isn't high, like high fantasy. I don't want something so intense I'm not able to, sort of escape the day-to-day touring for this book. I need something that's going to make me laugh. I need something that's going to make me feel things. And my friend was like, have you read the Percy Jackson books? And I was like, there's so many of them, I don't really have time. And she was like, what's wrong with you? Read Percy Jackson. So read the first book in one sitting, and then 2 weeks later had read all 14 that had been out at the time. The Tower Nero comes out a year later. I reread the entire series in preparation for that. So I was very familiar with the characters and the world. I had a deep love and appreciation for Nico di Angelo in particular, especially as a queer writer, especially as someone who, has a lot of odd similarities to his life as described in the books. In many ways, I remember what guided me in those early days of drafting was, you really are suited for this book. You have things that you can contribute and say about Nico and Will that maybe no one else can. So why not lean on those things? And why not make this book all the richer for that?
Yeah, of course. And little bit of a weird question, but isn't this a popular fan fiction like couple that people would write a lot of fan fiction about?
I hear that it is. I don't read fan fiction myself, but I understand that it is something that has been fan fictioned quite a bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a big Solangelo person. I tell people I'm very much one of you when they talk about Solangelo. But I think there's a reason that, so many readers have latched on to these two characters in particular. I think, lots of people love the opposites attract idea of a couple. But also when I think back to when Nico was introduced as a character and his journey throughout the books, there weren't that many queer characters, particularly in mainstream middle grade. So I am not surprised that Nico became such a popular character.
Yeah, of course. I know Nico was one of my favorite characters when I read the series.
Same.
All right.
Of course. And what other famous queer couples did you look to for inspiration, or which other ones do you just think are?
Ooh.
That's a great question. I've never really thought about it in that way. Were there sort of touchstones for you?
I don't know. I love that you kind of stumped us on this. I don't know that I was necessarily looking for other couples. I had written couples before in my original fiction. I think actually, and this sort of touches on something we've talked about a few times today in different interviews and whatnot, is that we really wanted to write a book about the middle period of a relationship, that it wasn't so much about new love. We do get to see some interesting moments from Will and Nico's past, but we wanted to explore more, how does a relationship maintain itself? So I don't know. I was, if anything, I was also thinking about other characters who were out in the Percy Jackson series, as well as, were there any other people I could introduce as potentially queer? Wow, that was a really good question. Yeah, I don't know that I was. I was mostly looking internal, because for me, I was an outsider coming into Percy Jackson. So I wanted to make sure that I not only understood this world but that I respected it. So I was always looking internal to Percy Jackson itself. And Rick could attest this. I took very detailed notes through my reads of the series. So I did have a lot of knowledge of where I could pull from. Yeah. But it was more about developing this dynamic of two people who on the surface may seem like opposites, but how are they actually similar?
Right. Yeah, that's well said. Yeah. I mean, as you were talking, the only thing that came to mind that may have been a subconscious model for me was Achilles and Patroclus in Madeline Miller's Song of Achilles, just because it had that beautiful queer relationship within the context of Greek mythology. There are not a whole lot of similarities between the sort of dynamics within the couples. Beyond that, I don't think, but it certainly was probably something I had in the back of my mind.
I will also say a thing we did talk about is wanting to make sure that Nico and Will felt just as important as like Percy and Annabeth.
Yeah.
That they were given the same space to have a relationship that was loving and caring and complicated, and that they could talk through issues and be shown that, humans are messy and humans make mistakes, and humans are also beautiful, forgiving, creatures. And so looking at other couples too, I do think it was something that was on our minds.
Of course, yeah. And with all of that tied into all this action, how did you go about balancing the two themes?
Well, I think, that really just kind of spoke to, I mean, I don't want to make it too simple. Like I did all the action and Mark did all the, emotional relationships. It wasn't quite that clear cut. But I tend to look at a manuscript in terms of like plot and the beats and the pace. And I sometimes don't think quite so much about the background relationships and giving them a chance to breathe and to talk to each other and to express their emotions. And I do think that I learned a lot from Mark in that regard. So I didn't feel that there was any sort of tension between those. It was more of kind of contributing ingredients to the stew pot, as they needed to happen.
There was a point, early in writing the first draft where I realized that maybe it would be beneficial to delve, there is a large flashback early in the book. That wasn't in the outline at all. We did not plan it at all. And I realized I think there might be value in exploring this and showing this thing that was never really spoken of. It was always sort of hush hush. Yep. So I think in that sense that sometimes that's what I brought was, okay, is it worth exploring something emotional a little more in depth? I tend not to write very action-packed, fast-paced novels. I like the slow burn. So I was always learning from Rick too of, there is a way you can do both, that you can end a chapter on this very high note that leads you directly in the next one while also having the introspective moments. So I definitely think we were both learning from each other.
Yeah, of course. And how did you two get into writing middle grade novels? I know, Rick, you were a teacher at one point, right?
I was a middle school teacher, so that is my in. It took me a while to realize I should be writing for them, but that's where all of that came from. And how about you?
I'm laughing because Rick has not heard this story, but there is actually a very specific reason I got into middle grade. I was doing a school visit in the Bronx a few months after Anger is a Gift came out. And, it is a sometimes very intense, very upsetting book that deals with, protests and police brutality. So I do this whole visit, and there was a girl in the front row the whole time was just scowling at me. And I didn't get the vibe. I didn't know what was going on. And so at the end, we get to questions. A few people, raise their hand. And I could see she wants to say something. So I finally was like, is everything okay? What's going on? And she was like, you got mad jokes. And I think this is my personality. I'm very upfront. I'm very jovial and kind of funny. And I was like, this is just who I am. And she said, so why was your book so sad? And I was shook. I was like, but it's such a pure criticism that came from this place of like, I want to understand why your book sounds like this and you sound this way. And she said, I would love to read a book that sounds like you. And it got in my head. And I decided that my main difference between young adult and middle grade was going to sound a little bit more like me. I get to be sillier. I get to be funny in a way. So, writing this book was such a journey for me too, in trying to learn how to balance those two things, because I don't know that I'm always that good at it. But yeah, that's how I got dragged by a child. That's how that's how I started writing middle grade.
That's beautiful.
Yeah, I love that.
That's so sweet. I hope she gets to read this book.
I do too.
Did you have any moments like that, Rick, that like with your students that made you realize?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, and they would always tell me, well, you tell stories in the classroom and that's your best thing, is that you're a storyteller, and you write. At the time, I was writing adult mystery novels. And they said, well, why don't you write for us? And I just sort of dismissed it at first. Said, no, that wouldn't work. But, you should always listen to the kids.
Yeah.
Always listen to the kids, because they know.
Yeah, let them drag you. Something that'll come.
Exactly.
Also, with the timing of this book, I was wondering, was this a book that started, it's like in its early days during COVID?
So I guess it was during COVID that it all happened. We started working on it in 21.
Early 2021.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we wrote it entirely virtually, email, Zoom, Microsoft Word notes. Yeah. So we didn't actually officially meet in person until January of this year.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah. So we had to do it all from a distance.
Yeah. How, in other ways, what would you say, like the pandemic, like how did that affect your book or your thinking for going into it?
Good question.
Joy. Like getting to write something where there are definitely some difficult things in this book and some heavier themes, but I was just thinking like, I want this book to be fun. I want it to be exciting. I want Percy Jackson fans, when it's announced, to, froth at the mouth and be just overwhelmed, which they were. It was that day. I remember October 6th, 2021. That was the day my phone broke twice because of how many notifications I got. But I think the joy in thinking about how fun this would be and how meaningful it would be was something that was always on my mind of, kids deserve this. Like they deserve to have this beautiful thing to look forward to.
Yeah, for sure. And on that note, when kids read this book, what kind of conversations do you hope that they can have with their family? A big thing with our podcast is we try to encourage like parents to read with their children. So what kind of conversations do you hope they could have with each other?
Well, I mean, anytime that you have parents reading with their children, that's beautiful and that's important. And any conversations that come out of that mutual process can be anyway very constructive. I love it when families read together. What those conversations are, I don't know. I imagine a lot of it will be around identity and who you are in the world and where you think you fit. That's a big Percy Jackson theme all the way back to the Lightning Thief. And also, as Mark mentioned, relationships. That's a big one. Like, how do you make a relationship work? How do you know when you're invested in something that's real and something that you need to devote your time and energy and emotion in your heart to?
Mm-hmm.
I would also say that this is a book about not necessarily judging a person based on the first thing that you see. It's kind of a repetitive motif throughout this, where even with Will and Nico, they have their basic sort of loving understanding of one another, but this book is about peeling back the layers and understanding how complicated everyone is around you. A great thing that was really fun to write was Will sort of getting to understand that the underworld isn't what he thinks it is, that he thinks it's just this place of death and darkness and nothing else. And then, Nico getting to understand that there's more to the lightness of Will and that he has more layers to him as well. So maybe that would be a really interesting conversation. How are people not what they seem like the first time you meet them? What happens as you get to know someone better?
Yeah.
I think this book is a beautiful message, because the most love stories end right after they get together, and you don't even get to see the hard part. Like when the middle is always the hard part. So
Exactly.
I'm very excited to get the chance to read this.
Exactly.
And I know we have to wrap up soon, but do you have any last messages you would like to give to our audience?
I hope more than anything that, people enjoy this ride. People enjoy some of the most ridiculous things either of us have ever come up with. There are some great, really, really funny gags in the Percy Jackson universe in this book. And I also hope that for the people who need it, that this book makes them feel seen and loved and appreciated. We both feel like this is a very special entry into the Percy Jackson world.
Amen to that.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show today. I love talking to you guys.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Jordan.
We hope you join us for the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Ali Condi will be here. She'll be celebrating her brand new picture book. It's called Here. And we hope you'll be here with us. We want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, we want to start by thanking our guests, Rick Riordan and Mark Oshiro. Please be sure to check out The Sun and the Star. Of course, we want to thank our fantastic guest host, Jordan Sahley. I want to thank the rest of my team, Fatima Khan, Rory Grady, Madison Dieras, Monica Rivera Sosa, Ann O'Leary, Soji Franklin. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me. Most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.